like a lot of times we try to separate ourselves from like, this is us and then that's nature, you know,
and the further and further we get away from those connections to nature, I personally think the worse our health outcomes are going to be.
The Florida Panther, are they being affected by the inbreeding challenge as the California mountain lion is?
You know, back in the 1970s, best estimates is that there were like 20 panthers in the state of Florida.
An all-new episode.
No politics.
No one is talking about this.
No politics.
And I'm disappointed. I thought you were going to bring a Florida Panther. I got this microphone all set up and so forth. You know?
Yeah. They tend not to like long train rides. So,
no.
Yeah. Our Panthers are very happy where they are, and it's one of those things that you know, if you are lucky enough to see one in the wild, it's rear end going the other way. Mm-hmm. They're very shy, very elusive animals.
So they're not the man-eating tigers.
They're not. They're definitely not. It's their nickname is the Ghost of the Forest. And we worked with a documentary filmmaker for a number of years, trying to capture images of them on camera traps. And he's only seen them a handful of times,
really,
in his entire career. So
you guys have like trail cams?
Yeah. And so the ones that we were working on with him were actually similar to your setup you have here, multiple flashes, multiple cameras and everything to be able to capture these amazing images. And our team went out in the field with him to help service the cameras. Not that we have any particular expertise in cameras, but we were okay being up to our chest in, swamps.
Oh wow! You're not afraid of like the gators? And
it's one of those things that they're there.
Jesus Christ!
And you're careful. And if you see a log that's floating on the surface and then it suddenly just drops underwater, maybe you go the other way. You get out of that space. So.
See, I'd always thought, me living up in Jersey, we always had black bears. Mm-hmm. And I always thought, I was like, oh, it is a little risky going deep into the woods sometimes, especially, you run into the mom with their cubs or so forth. But then I always thought, I was like, people probably down south with alligators or people in the ocean who are there all the time, they're probably around these, we deem predators and like it's nothing, Mm-hmm. And then when I moved down here, I was like, yeah, I'll probably not think of alligators as like that's scary. But then when I moved down here, I was like, very scary. And I was like, I could never see myself going waist deep in that. It's like, you got some balls.
Yeah, I got my entry into this world underwater. So I'm an avid scuba diver. Been diving with all kinds of sharks and everything, and I still have all my fingers and toes. And it's the general rule of thumb is that you don't
bother them, they won't bother you.
Yeah, we're not on their menu, and we don't have a lot of meat on us, and we're kind of gamey. So they're looking for other things. And when you talk about something like black bears, they're foragers, right? They're eating the fruits and fish and things like that. And then with Florida Panthers, again, they're not going after anything even as big as we are. So the biggest type of animal that they would prey on would be like a white-tailed deer.
And why do you think you guys haven't been able to really capture them as much as you wanted? And it's very rare to see them in the wild. They're obviously, you said elusive, but numbers wise has got to play a role, I think, right?
Yeah. So back in the 1970s, the best estimates is that there were like 20 panthers in the state of Florida.
Oh, wow.
20. Yeah. And now that number is, up closer to, 200. But, we talk about numbers all the time, and, people think, 200 panthers, they imagine 200 panthers running down the street, right? It's like, that's a lot of...
all at the same time.
Oh my gosh, that's a huge amount of panthers, right? But, you were asking me, about, baseball earlier. And I mentioned, we used to go watch the Rays when I lived over in Tampa. And you go to the Trop, And, I think that holds like, 30 some thousand fans.
Yeah.
Usually by the fifth inning or so, they're losing so badly that a lot of people have left. And if there's only 200 people left in the stadium, like, imagine that. That's an empty stadium.
Yeah.
So it's always in the context of where they live. So 200 Panthers is good. But it's moving in the right direction. But there's actually definitions for a recovery plan. And so, we're about halfway there probably as far as the number of Panthers that we would like to see in the state of Florida.
So you want like a little bit over 400, you'd say? That'd be the ideal?
Yeah, there's an actual management plan that when they were listed on the endangered species list that defined what a recovered population would be. And essentially it would be 2 separate populations, each with about 200 to 250 cats. But right now they're only found in Southwest Florida. So, and there's environmental, human-made issues that keep them from continuing to move and spread out from there.
How would they get down to 20? Because I'm starting to, I'm just thinking of a line graph here, and I'm thinking it's got to be like the Tesla stock right now, where it started somewhere, now it went down to 20 to where we are here.
Yeah, so the Panthers, pumas, mountain lions, they're all the same type of cat. And back in the early 1900s, they ranged from Arkansas and that far north all the way down into Central America. So they were essentially one population.
And can they breed? They can breed together?
They can, yeah. Okay. And that was actually part of the management plan that the state of Florida did back in the 1980s. Okay. Yeah. But they're essentially a type of mountain lion, right? Yeah. But it was through hunting. So as we moved into their spaces, they were hunted, and their numbers continued to dwindle. And then as development moved into their areas and we really started populating, especially South Florida, cars became a significant problem. So car strikes is the number one killer of panthers to this day. And then their numbers just, continued to go down. And luckily it was recognized that you need that apex predator in the ecosystem, in nature, in order to keep everything else in balance. And that's when the state of Florida actually brought in, I think it was 8 female pumas from Texas and released them into the Everglades and followed them. And 5 of the 8 started breeding with the panther population. And that was the key to solving that genetic bottleneck.
Okay, that's interesting. What sparked that idea?
Just that all panthers, pumas are genetically essentially similar. And because the panther population in Florida couldn't naturally migrate, or not migrate necessarily, but move up off the peninsula and get to other panther populations, it was doomed. There was no way that they were going to get more genetics in there unless they were physically brought in. Okay. And so that's a radical intervention, and usually is not done because there's a lot of risks associated with that. In this particular case, it worked exceptionally well.
Do you see them repeating that at all?
I don't think so. The really interesting thing about conservation is that when you intervene, whether it's a professional group or as an individual, if you're trying to fix a problem, it is so much harder than preventing the problem from happening itself, right? So introducing these cats is trying to correct a problem. Once the cats were there, and then we were able to give them the space that they needed, now they're naturally bringing their numbers back. And that is significantly easier than, for example, trying to breed a bunch of Florida Panthers under human care and then putting them back out in the wild. That's extremely challenging to do.
Yeah. Well, I know the Panthers, I guess, aren't as bad as a lot of other endangered species that are like some rhinos. There's only like 2 or 3 left, where like their only option now is like IVF and not because they're basically a lot of the critically endangered species are where the panther was back in the 70s. We got like less than 24. So then I guess then you're only left with kind of those options.
Yeah, and the advantage for the Florida Panthers is that there was this other genetic pool in Texas that they could pull from, right? With the rhinos,
yeah, you can't really.
There's only the few that are left. So
yeah, and the Florida Panther is the official state animal, right?
it is.
Why is that?
I think it's sexy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a big cat.
Yeah.
And it's very iconic.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the alligator is, also very well known.
Oh yeah. It's funny that they wouldn't put that as the state animal. Right?
Yeah, but again, remember you're talking about humans here, right? Yeah. And so when you talk about a connection to wildlife, it is easier for us to connect with things that look like us. So panthers are mammals. Their eyes are in the front of their head. They look a lot like our domestic house cats, which we have a relationship with, right? Yeah. Alligators have, teeth. They're reptiles. Their eyes are on the side of their head.
They're dinosaurs. Yeah.
And so it's a little bit harder to connect with them. But a panther, it's just like, oh my gosh, it's a cat. I know cats. Cats live in my house.
Just a little bigger.
And so that's really easy to fall in love with.
What are they listed as endangered wise, like on the actual endangered species list officially?
Yeah, I believe the IUCN listing is endangered. Okay. I think it actually goes back between endangered and critically endangered.
Okay, bouncing back and forth.
Yeah, but they also don't update that like every year. And their numbers have grown since they were originally listed. Okay. So I think they're listed as endangered.
What type of protections do they get then?
So they are protected at the federal level and the state level. Okay. You're not allowed to hunt them. You're not allowed to possess them. You can't have them as pets.
So you would have got in trouble if you brought one today to put it on the.
Yeah. Fish and Wildlife probably would have been calling right away.
Would have been tough putting them on the bright line.
Totally. They may have frowned with that. But yeah. So they're protected in that way. But again, the hunting and that sort of impact, really isn't what we're worried about.
Yeah, it's the cars.
It's the cars and the development as we move into their spaces. So one of the solutions that the state of Florida put forward, and again, this also has its history back in the 80s and 90s, is they recognized that car strikes were killing these animals, and usually, unfortunately, it's the females. So the males will set up a territory, but the females will move in, visit the male, and then once she has cubs, she moves away from him. So she's the one that's crossing the roads. And so that was very impactful to the population. And so the state of Florida stepped in and said, hey, we need to do something. We need to start putting these wildlife underpasses and overpasses over the roads. So again, back in the 1980s, Alligator Alley, I-75 between Miami and Naples, that was a kill zone for these animals. Tons of, dozens of animals were getting killed on that road every year. And so the state of Florida put 24 wildlife underpasses under I-75. If you've ever taken the road, you probably don't even realize you're driving over them. But you've probably seen the fences. And there's a continuous fence that goes all the way from Miami to Naples.
Okay.
Ever since those mitigations were put in place, guess how many panthers have been killed?
Oh, zero.
It's 100% effective.
Well, I got to think too, then it's also for the state's point of view, cost effective rather than an overpass.
100%. And what's even more cost effective is when you plan it into the road. So when you know where the panthers are and you know the paths that they want to travel and you know where their connected lands are, if those are going through corridors that's going to have a road passing through it, you design these underpasses and overpasses into the road, and it's significantly cheaper.
Makes sense now why when you drive you do see the fences on the side.
Yeah,
because it's meant to kind of funnel them into the underpass.
Yeah, and there's actual studies that have been done that, and this isn't just panthers we're talking about. We're talking about bears. We're talking about alligators. We're talking about deer. that are needing to cross these roads. When they do that with their young, their offspring learn to use the underpasses. And then they continue the process. So it's really just one generation that kind of has to figure it out. And then once they know, now we're good. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like the wildebeest in Africa. They know exactly where they're going at this point.
Yeah, and they learn it from mom, right? And learning that, okay, this is a safe way to get from point A to point B.
That is very interesting. I never thought about that because I've been following the Wallace-Annenberg overpass construction project. I'm not sure if you know about it over in Los Angeles.
Oh yeah, I've heard about it.
Yeah. It's connecting basically two populations of mountain lions that I believe it's the US 101 goes right through it outside of LA, and that separates I believe it's Bell Canyon and then the Santa Monica Mountains, and it's a very highly trafficked highway. I think it's at least 4 lanes, and it's LA, so I mean you're constantly and people driving fast, and basically you can't cross it if you're an animal. I mean, it's almost impossible to get across it alive, let alone be able to come back. So basically what's been happening over the years is there's such a separation that the biggest problem is inbreeding. And the thought is that in another decade or so, if this continues to happen, it's almost like we're forcing them to breed themselves out of existing because they're coming up with the ones that are being born now are have kinky tails. There's some effects on the sperm because of the amount of inbreeding, and then also I believe the immune system is also being affected to be able to fight diseases. So now you have a lot of weaker mountain lions being born in. So they developed the overpass, but I think it was like $90 million or something. I know it's Los Angeles and so, but you're talking about putting a hill over a highway.
Right.
90 million, a little steep, but that was a mixture of donors, the state funding, and public funding.
Yeah.
And it's set to be released early 2026, I believe. But like you said too, with the underpasses, this is going to also help. I believe it's the foxes, the deer, a whole mess of different species will be able to cross it. And I think too, it's very cool because it's integrating the human population out there into knowing what that is.
Right.
So you see that is the overpassing, and that is what's connecting the lions to now breed correctly. And I think that that's like the most important part, is that educational standpoint that people can see and then realize like how important it is to have that and to be able to then relate with it. And I think what they're doing, the state, they're putting cameras on there, like the trail cams. So now you can literally monitor every animal that goes over. You get fabulous photographs. You can put those out online, so people know exactly what they're driving over, what's around them. And I think that enhances the connection, which then enhances the care, I think, for it.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the other animals that would also be using, those overpasses and underpasses. Those are the animals that the panthers, would be feeding on, right? And so when you have those wildlife corridors like that provide safe passage for all the animals, it's creating one larger area of the wild. We like to talk a lot about, we have, this conservation area over here and this park area over here, but a lot of those animals have to be able to move between those spaces, right? And so that allows them to do that. You're also mentioning the cost of that overpass, and you're exactly right. It does cost a lot. But one of the costs that a lot of people don't realize is, and you mentioned it yourself, the animals can't get across this road, right? The reason they can't get across this road is because cars are hitting them. If it's a small animal, you might be okay. But if you're hitting a bear, a cougar, even a deer at 70 miles an hour, at best, that is a huge cost on you and your car getting it fixed. It might cause an accident. You might get injured in the process, right? So that cost to build that road or bridge or tunnel, you can think of it as being offset by the savings that you're having in fewer car accidents, fewer car strikes, not having to repair your car, and having a generally safer journey when you're traveling down the road. You don't have to worry about that deer unexpectedly jumping out in front of you and you having to swerve to avoid it.
Well, also too, the effect of if a deer gets hit by a car, people say, oh, it's like say it's not endangered or anything, like whatever, right? But then who's trying to come on the road to eat that deer? So then it's attracting.
Oh, 100%. And we talk to our guests at the zoo a lot about that and what they can do to help animals like this. And we say, don't throw your trash out the window. And they're like, oh yeah, because we don't want to litter. And we're like, no. You're attracting the prey items, the prey species that these larger animals are going to feed on. Yeah. And now you're attracting all the wildlife to the road. You're not chucking it, 100 yards out into the scrub. That stuff's falling right next to the road. And so now you're endangering everybody that comes along that road because now the bigger animals are going to be attracted there.
And the Florida Panther, are they being affected by the inbreeding challenge as the California mountain lion is similarly? Because if there's only, there's only a little bit over 200. Granted, I want to say back in like the mid 20th century with humans, there'd be easily 10 to 15 kids per family. Mm-hmm. So if you think about it that way, you're talking, probably 20, 30 families existing altogether. I got to envision that there's probably somewhat of a problem, but.
Yeah. So the folks from, FWC, the wildlife biologists, that's actually getting on the frontier of what they're looking at. They've started to notice some of the cats that have been hit by cars, and then they are able to do necropsies on them, and which is think of human autopsy, but necropsy is on an animal. So they can do a lot of testing on them, and they are noticing some issues with their immune systems. They have seen on some trail cameras some cats that are not walking correctly, almost staggering, and they're still not sure what's going on. So that's why a lot of these trail cams are helping to provide that basic information on just the overall health of the population, to your point.
Okay. That's interesting too, because they wouldn't be injured. Are they starting to see that on like a consistent basis, them kind of limping around? Or
so from my understanding, it's a little bit cyclical. They've seen it some in the past. They haven't seen it as much in the very recent past. So yeah, it just depends.
Are they cornered around the state?
As far as like where they can go? Yeah, there's a number of natural barriers. The big one that you'll see is I'm gonna murder the name of this river. I think it's the Caloosahatchee. Perhaps?
Oh no! It is I was pronouncing the Caloosahatchee. I was like, it's definitely Native American.
right. I think that's the one, the Caloosahatchee. But essentially, it goes from Lake Okeechobee all the way out to I think it might dump out around Fort Myers area.
Okay.
But the cats can't get across it. And so that's a natural barrier because we've also created canals to make that a continual route from the lake all the way to the sea or to the Gulf, and the cats can't get across it. So what ended up happening is back in 1990, I can't remember the date, but Hurricane Andrew came through southern Florida and blew over a lot of power lines, and Florida Power and Light and Duke Energy, everybody was like, we have to really reinforce our power structure. So they started building a lot of these big power poles out of concrete and steel. Well, they had all of these wooden power poles left over. So the conservationists got a hold of them and started putting wildlife crossings over the Caloosahatchee in hopes that the animals would start using them. So fast forward
thinking outside the box.
Yeah. And so like fast forward to, I think it was 2017, Carlton Ward Jr., the wildlife conservationist that we worked with at the zoo, put up a trail cam on the north side of the Caloosahatchee River near one of these crossings and caught an image of a female panther and her cub utilizing that crossing. And so that was the first recorded panthers north of that demarcation line. And in fact, you can go to the Florida DMV and get a Florida Panther, say Florida Panther license plate. And the image on that is that image of the mother panther and her cub. It's super cool. And so now that barrier has been breached, right? Which is great. So now that the cats can start moving north. So the next one is I-4. And I know that the Department of Transportation is already looking at wildlife passages, over and under I-4 to kind of help facilitate the panthers being able to move into those areas.
Well, I do know that they want to cross because I saw a video of a woman who she saw a Florida panther. She was on, it wasn't like a big river, it was just a little swampy area. And she was walking on like these boards, that was kind of set up for humans to walk on.
Is this the one that comes like down the boardwalk?
And she's recording, and the Florida panther, you could tell, like, wanted to cross, but then would turn around because she was there. But then was like, where else am I going to go? And then he keeps like eyeing her up and she's like, but then the Florida Panther literally was like, fuck it. And then just booked it right past her leg. And pretty decent size too. She must have been shitting her pants. But I was thinking from that animal's behavior, clearly there must not have been another convenient way around that swampiness. And it kind of risked, in its own mind, probably risked a little bit of its safety running right past this woman, and then literally skied right past her. So it was a very interesting interaction because it sort of counters a narrative of like the Florida Panther being that or panthers or pumas being like that dominant beast mode predator, because this woman, you could tell, was frantic, on the video, and animals pick up on that too. And if that was in predator mode, that would have been a very easy navigation, way to get around it. And it wasn't. I think it was just as scared probably as the woman.
Yeah. And again, folks have studied Florida panthers, for years, and to be able to see one in person is extremely rare. There's a number of wildlife photographers that travel the world and, look for clouded leopards and, all of the big rare cats
sitting in the swamps.
Yeah. And the Florida panther is the hardest one. It's called the ghost of the forest. It doesn't, it knows you're there. He has excellent eyesight. It has excellent smell. These giant paws that make them absolutely quiet. And if you're around, they don't want to be there. They're going to be somewhere else. So yeah, I've seen that video. And the woman does exactly what you should do, right? She now, not too sure what was going through her head, but she stood her ground. And the cat was coming towards her, and she just kind of backed to the side and let it through. And then after it passes, you can tell the cat's noping out. Like, it's like, I'm done. That was not expected. So, something like that, it may have been that, even, back in the day, before we built all of these, areas through the wild areas, as we started exploring, there were these paths. And like, oh, has somebody been here before? It's like, no. It's like these are wildlife trails. Yeah, and if you've ever been out in the scrub of Florida, it's nasty. It's hard to move through, right? And so these wildlife trails, and the bears use them, the deer use them, the panthers use them, and we started using them. So this might have been a normal place that was commonly frequented by not just panthers, but a lot of different wildlife. And you're exactly right. It was kind of a swampy area, and it's just, oh, there's this nice raised boardwalk. It might be easier to use that. And that's probably what happened with the panther. And it just so happened there was a human there, and it was very unexpected.
And do they travel during the day?
They do.
Because that was during the day. Are they more nocturnal? What's their preference?
It's kind of all over the place. Like a lot of cats, they're gonna hunt at night. They're a little bit more nocturnal. But they could definitely travel and everything during the day, especially if it's during breeding season and they're trying to find other panthers. Okay. They might be moving and everything during the day.
Their style of hunting, do they hunt alone? Or are they more like hyenas?
No. So when people think of big cats, I feel like a lot of people think about lions, right?
Like the pride of lions.
Yeah, they're going to hunt in a group and everything, but they are the exception to the rule. Most big cats, tigers, panthers, jaguars, all prefer to be alone, and so they're solitary. So they're going to be hunting solitary. The males will kind of set up a territory. They'll hold that territory. If other males come in, then they'll convince them to go somewhere else. If females come through that territory, then they might seek them out. If the female isn't ready to breed or she's already pregnant, then she'll again convince the male to go away, or she'll go away. But they're very solitary. The only time that you would see them together as groups would be a mother and her cubs.
Okay. And the males, they basically wait for the females to come through their territory. They're not actually seeking out different territories. Do they have the same territory throughout their whole life then?
It might change, throughout their life, because if another bigger, stronger male moves in, then they might get displaced. But that's just the normal order of things in the world of
two guys fighting over a bar seat.
Yeah. And then the girl walks in, then suddenly it gets even more amped up, right? So it's the same sort of thing. But she's always the one in control. She's the one that decides when it's time to breed, who she's going to breed with, and she may actually breed with multiple males to increase her chance of being able to have offspring. So,
and what's a gestation period? Like 2-3 months?
For most cats of that size, it's probably 90 to 100 days.
Okay.
Give or take. So a little over 3 months. And then they'll usually have anywhere from 1 to 4 cubs. If they have more than that, then it tends to be a little bit hard for mom to be able to juggle. And like a lot of cats, they come out, their eyes are closed, might take a week or two for them to be able to open their eyes. So when she gives birth, it's always, she's going to go off somewhere very,
remote.
Very remote, away from any other potential panthers coming by. And then, be able to raise her young. They might, hang out with her for, 6 months or so, maybe a little bit longer. But they tend to kind of get shooed away and kind of start a life of their own so that she can then go through the process again. Yeah.
So, and it's not like the lion pride where she has some other females to like rely on. So is she hunting with the young from basically birth through they leave?
Yeah. And so this actually gets to why a breeding program to reintroduce them into the wild is extraordinarily difficult. Because what mom is doing is she is taking her kids on that hunt. And so the way it works is, they're mammals, right? So they're drinking her milk to start off with. So she has to go out, hunt every once in a while just for herself, but the cubs are drinking milk. Then what she does is she starts bringing some of those kills back to the cubs. And then she's literally chewing it up and then, putting it on the ground. And then they're licking the blood. They're starting to eat the meat so that they understand, okay, this is food. This is what I'm supposed to be eating. Also supplemented with her milk. So it's transitional. And then what she'll do is she'll start bringing back, game, food that's not dead and letting the cubs learn to hunt. So it might be a small mouse or a rat or something like that. And then give them the experience to learn how to hunt. And then they would be going out and joining her on hunts too. So it is extremely important for the cubs to learn how to hunt and learn how to be a panther from mom.
Those are some of the most brutal times in wildlife. I've seen some recordings of killer whales. They're hunting seals and orcas, I should say. And there's one young seal. You could tell just like, there's an orca swimming around while it's on its little ice and it just didn't care. And you could tell very ignorant. One of the orcas was able to, and you're talking about a pod of I think 4 or 5 with some young, pops up, grabs the seal, pulls it underwater, and now it's done. Yeah. Right. And for, I think it was 45 minutes, that orca brought the seal to its young, and they were literally just pushing it back and forth. Like, people would say playing with it, but it was more so education time of how to hunt. And the seal's alive as it's surrounded by orcas, not going anywhere. But before it was actually killed, and it is one of those brutal times where you just look at it and you're like, man, nature and wildlife can sometimes be brutal with that. But that is how they learn from a safe way, because if it's too big or so forth, and you try while it's still in its element rather than off the ice in your element, it can be tough. And I saw one famous photograph of I think it was a cheetah carrying a monkey, like in its mouth, neck in its mouth. And the monkey had, it was dead, but it had its baby that was still alive, and it was hugging the mother while the cat had the mom in its mouth. And it was brutal. And I read it. I actually looked it up because I was like, is this real? Is this a real photograph? Right. But it was real. And the photographer, it was photos, not video. And through the story, it turned out that it was exactly that. Where that was probably one of the most pivotal moments for the cat's young to learn, because it got to learn with a live baby monkey to kill. So same size as it, can really learn, how it is. So, but I mean, that was just brutal. But I guess every single mammal sometimes has to, the way of the cycle.
Yeah. Any carnivore has to learn, how to hunt. I think it's interesting though, the way that you were describing that, right? So it was brutal. It made you feel bad. All of these things, and it's a credit to you, is describing empathy towards the wildlife, right? And it's that empathy, again, rewind, 100 years ago, we didn't see these images. And maybe it was a little bit more utilitarian view towards wildlife. We just didn't care. We didn't have an emotional connection to them. Now, because of the availability of being able to see these sorts of images and everything, it causes an emotional reaction. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think people being able to be emotionally connected to wildlife is exactly what's going to save them. It's understanding exactly what you said, that this is how a carnivore learns, right? And this is what is going to make them a good predator. The other side of that equation is also true. The animals that are prey for these carnivores learn how to escape. And so you might have the same situation, but that animal goes after a monkey, but the monkey escapes, right? And now that monkey's genetics are going to be passed on, and they're going to become even better at escaping. So all of this is in service of making sure that these species are as strong and as expert as they possibly can be at what they do. And when you have that kind of ecosystem out there, that balanced ecosystem, we benefit from that. I found my way into this world underwater. And so underwater is really hard because it's out of sight, out of mind. Like, it's even harder to see images and everything from stuff that goes on underwater, but half the oxygen that we breathe comes from healthy oceans. Mm-hmm. And so when you have that healthy ecosystem, those orcas are doing their job, the seals are doing their job, we ultimately benefit from that. And when things get out of whack, get out of balance, that's where we would suffer as well.
Well, and it was funny because last week I was I felt almost like hypocritical because I was feeling bad for the seal at that time, but I just saw I feel like penguins they're considered like the most unlucky little species out there. But I saw a seal chasing a penguin right on the edge of the tide, and the penguin is like trying to glide through the sand a little bit, and the seal was huge, and it was just like flopping over there, and then it grabbed its tail, and then I was like, I was just feeling bad for you freaking a couple weeks ago, you know what I'm saying? I was like, you were the one getting badgered around like you're the skinny boy in like high school at a locker, you know what I'm saying? And now here you are, the predator, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And then and I was like, it'd probably be the same way with the penguin, and you can go all the way down the food chain, and then the penguin's the victim, but then it's the predator. And then I've always thought it was very interesting how aesthetic plays a role in who we feel bad for and who we don't feel bad for, because aesthetics huge where, when people see snakes getting killed, we really don't generally would have that empathy. I saw a video of out in Africa. It's crocodiles out there, right? Not alligators.
Correct.
And I saw a cheetah hunting a crocodile, which I thought was wild, very ballsy, but I myself have been lucky where I've never been starving like animals do. Because animals, they're walking around the wild starving.
Yeah.
I feel like 24/7. They don't have a fridge to go back to. So we've never hit that level. And it jumped into the water where you can't even see what's going on. You just you see the water kicking up and stuff like that, but then it had by its neck right up, dragged it out like a rag doll. I was like, man, that is stronger than I thought.
Right.
But I was like, it's a crocodile, so I don't feel bad for it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I don't feel bad for it, and just because it's not cute, we lack the empathy. So
Yeah.
I thought that was it was very interesting, kind of like analyzing my own thoughts on it.
Yeah.
Because I feel that same way with rats, with mice. Everyone loves dogs and cats. You know what I'm saying? Just because they're cute, cuddly. But then there's always some on the reverse side where if we view them in the predatorial way, then we obviously, we completely lack that empathy.
Yeah. So it's impossible to look at the world not through your own prism, right? And regardless of what you're thinking about or looking at, you're always viewing it through your own biases and your own point of view. And so if you kind of back that out to, humans as a species, the reason we're so successful is we've figured out this social game. We figured out how to work together. We figured out how to create extraordinarily complex social groups, most complex on the entire planet. And we've been able to, as a species, dominate the planet, right? That is hardwired into our DNA. Right? I'm hardwired to form a relationship with you as another human.
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with what you look like. You look a lot like me. And the further you get away from looking like me, from behaving like me, the harder it is to form a relationship with you, right? So that's why, when you hear stories of people having these deep relationships with chimpanzees or apes, it's so much easier because you can see something that looks a lot like us looking back at you, right?
Yeah.
And so they there's a lot of things they do that they behave like us. Then you get another, step away. Now maybe you're talking about a mammal, so like your dogs, cats, things like that. They're furry and they're warm like us, but they're completely covered with hair. They walk on 4 legs, so maybe I can form a relationship with them, but it's going to take a little bit more effort. And then you just go all the way down that continuum. When I worked at the Florida Aquarium in Tampa, one of the things that we had to do is get people to fall in love with fish. Look at how we treat fish.
Yeah.
Just in general, right?
Yeah.
Not a lot of empathy there.
Yeah.
But our job was to make people fall in love with these things because that was the only way that we were going to be able to protect them. And we used to throw all kinds of facts, like a green moray eel.
You're trying to create that similarity thought.
Yeah. And we used to say, green moray eels and they can grow to be 6, 7 feet long and they've got these crazy double jaws, almost like, alien. And they're just, these amazing creatures. And then people would hear that information, see the eel and be even more afraid of it because we were trying to engage with them in an intellectual way. Right. And that's not how humans engage. Humans engage with each other emotionally.
Yeah.
And so we said, okay, we're gonna try something completely different. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna put a diver in the water. And we're gonna put them on a full face mask so that they can talk to the guests. And we're gonna send them underwater and we're gonna talk about them. Right? We're gonna say, hi, my name is Mike. I work here at Florida Aquarium, and this is what I get to do. Isn't this such a great job? I get to be in here with all the fish and right? I'm forming a relationship with the people. As we're doing this, here comes this green moray eel, and it swims out and wraps all around me and sits here right next to my face. I just keep talking. And just like it's not even there. And you can see everybody in the crowd, their eyes are getting really big. Like, what is going on? And so again, it wasn't a trained behavior like it was on a cue, but it was absolutely a behavior that we knew this animal would do. And so the person on the outside would be like, Mike, what in the world? What? You got something wrapped around you? You see what's going on? And I'd be like, oh, this is Frankenstein. He's a green moray eel. I'd be like, why Frankenstein? What's going on? And I'd be like, well, Frankenstein got into a bit of a tussle with one of the eels one day, and we had to do surgery on him to kind of patch him back together because he had some pretty deep wounds and everything. And now you can kind of see some of the scars on him and everything. But he just likes to come out and hang out with us. So what you're doing is now this is not just a green moray eel, it's Frankenstein. It's an individual.
You humanize it with the name and
not even necessarily humanized it. So because I think by saying you're humanizing it, underestimates the animal world's ability to form relationships and to have emotion. We talk about our animals having emotion all the time, right? So I'm creating an individual here, right? Yeah. I'm sharing the relationship that I have with this animal with you. Really hard for you to have a relationship with a green moray eel. But you and I have a relationship now, right? You and I have a relationship. I have a relationship with Frankenstein here, and now you feel more connected to it, right? And there's example after example like that in conservation where if you can get people to form an emotional relationship with an individual animal, right? Then they're much more likely to carry that with them when they leave, carry that emotional connection when they leave, and take an action once they're gone. And that we were talking about this earlier. I think that's the superpower of the zoo, is that people can come into that space and safely form those connections, maybe directly if they absolutely love tigers and they're going over there looking in their eyes and they can smell them, they can see their whiskers twitch and everything. Maybe I don't even need a human there, right? Yeah. I'm already kind of there. But maybe the reason I'm there is because it's a safe place for my kid to walk around. I could really care less that there's animals here. But then I run into one of the zoologists, hear their story, and well, so why in the world would somebody, you're absolutely crazy working with those panthers, right? Like, you're out of your mind. Well, no, I'm not actually out of my mind. Like, this is what it means to me and why it's important to me. So you start forming that relationship, and it gets people to feel differently about wildlife. And that's kind of the whole point, is that we meet people where they are when they come to the zoo, and whether they are completely passionate, they have the Panther license plate. They don't use any single-use plastics. They turn off their lights during bird migration season. Like, they do all the things, right? And they just love that environment, and that's why they're there. To the person that literally got drugged there because their significant other likes animals, right? But they hate animals under human care, right? That's just a rub against them. But we want to meet people where they are in their conservation journey and say, let's form a relationship and maybe move you one step down that road, because it's so important and so beneficial to you if we're saving nature.
Yeah, well, I think too, it's a grabber. I want to almost call it like a cheap grabber, to grab people's like focus and to focus on the animal and to empathize with them, especially. I mean, I feel like this is a way they could empathize very quickly with basically any animal, because it's usually the most interesting topic across the board with anything, really. I mean, if you listen to any podcast, this is usually one of the first topics that comes up. That's always number one on the list, which is like breeding and sexual partners and how they breed, and those types of topics I found pull us in. And I love watching wildlife documentaries. I love it. I love learning about the comparative psychology, like we were just talking about before.
I thought you were going to say you love watching wildlife breed.
Oh no,
that was. I was going to be worried there for a minute. Okay, you start. Okay, that's not the road you were taking me down.
Yeah,
okay.
Then wouldn't be able to monetize a video on YouTube if I started going down that road. No. What is it? It's not what's it called? I won't even say the term. I forget it now. But No, I was gonna say like learning about the different ways and the reasons why like animals breed.
Yeah.
And also like their relationship with their young too. Who takes care of the young? I think it always people when it hits home, people can relate with it. It's a driving factor. And when I was watching these wildlife documentaries, that I felt like was always one aspect that pulled me in. And maybe you guys do it at the zoo or so forth, but it also probably depends on your, the age group too, of who you're speaking with. I found was so interesting was the way a hyena breeds and the structure of a hyena society, which is female-led, female-dominated, and that they basically run the pack and they choose who they have sex with. And then I thought it was so interesting, and this is why now like I don't necessarily look at hyenas as that predator, but I view them as like an opportunistic animal that is no different than humans in a way where we'll take the opportunities when we can. We'll use what we have at our disposal to kind of level up in our own societal hierarchy, right? And climb the social ladder.
Yeah. So you're hitting back on that empathy, right? That relationship. You're talking about familial relationships.
Yeah.
And that's one of the most interesting things when you're walking around the zoo is you'll see an animal that again are black bears, Lewis and Clark. Wonderful black bears. They're from Maine, and they were orphaned. And so they live together.
I don't have to ask where the Lewis and Clark reference came from with the names for that. Yeah,
exactly. But they are extremely happy. They love their zoologists. They occasionally have little tiffs because they're brothers. But they're also 25, which is geriatric for bears. So when they have a tiff, it's just kind of like, I'm going to put my mouth on your leg, and then they sit there like it's like, really that. But they're getting old, right? But if I don't have a brother, if I'm not an orphan, okay, maybe I'm just kind of connecting with them because they're big, furry animals. But then we have our Saimeng. Our Saimeng is a single mom with 2 young kids. And I have had conversations with single moms with kids come up, and they are fascinated by her, by Rhea. And
do you use the term single mom?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. Because in the Saimeng world, the male plays a significant role in rearing the young. But with him out of the picture, now she's got to do everything on her own. And he was there, obviously, when the first one was born. But she had 2 offspring, fairly close in time, is about a little over a year apart. And then he passed away. So now she's a single mom with 2 young kids. And we have a whole support system around her so that she can be a successful mom, right? We're not coming in and caring for the kids. We're helping her be the best mom that she can. So many people can relate to that, right? And so even though, and again, now, and she's a primate, right? So you can look at her and be like, she kind of looks like me. She's, I understand, what she's going through. When she's sitting there and kind of has her arms crossed, she's sitting on the ground, and Louie and Lulu, her 2 kids, are bouncing around the tree. You can just tell, like, she's definitely taking some mom time right now and just letting the kids play. There's so many different ways that people can empathize with that. And that's the kind of connection, right? So in the animal world, there are so many different ways that you can survive the day. Sometimes you got to be as a group. Sometimes you're an individual. But when you come to the zoo, you see all of those options, right? So this is pulling the curtain back a little bit, because people ask us all the time, well, why do you have this animal and everything? There's a lot of things that go into those decision making. But being able to have a lot of different options for people to connect with is really the key. Because at the end of the day, if you're a total, herper and you love snakes and gators and everything, I can show you big cats all day because I like big cats. It's not gonna mean anything to you, right? Yeah. But I go over and I tell you about Fred and Wilma, our two American alligators, and tell you how smart they are, and Fred knows his name, and we recently had to do some surgery on him, and the way that we did that was we just literally asked him to come behind the scenes, and then he voluntarily took his shot to be anesthetized and went to sleep, and then our veterinarian was able to come in, do the surgery, and then he went right back out on habitat. Like if you're somebody who loves herps, you're vibrating with that story, right? You're really, really connected. So people, going back to the you look through your own lens, people see themselves reflected in everything around them. And
that's the truth.
And what we found is that, again, if you come to the zoo and you're looking at the animals and everything, that's one level of engagement. But if I can engage with you, you can see yourself reflected in me and vice versa. Now we have a relationship. Yeah. Now we can start talking about some deeper things, some deeper actions that are going to be more meaningful because that human is there to connect them to the wild.
Yeah. I found that with lions. I learned a lot of beneficial things from learning about just what lions do, and just because the only times you see lions on like TV or in a documentary are when they're hunting, and when they're active. You very rarely see them in their normal spot, which is laying down. And learning that lions sometimes are considered resting, either sleeping or laying down up to 20 hours a day. I mean, that puts things into perspective where, maybe you don't have to be going at things 100% of the time, as long as that small percentage that you're really going after. Because when they're using those 3-4 hours to hunt each day, then they're very much hyper focused in that hunt mode. But the rest of the time, I mean, they're not staying up hunting 24 hours a day like we kind of tend to think they are. So then you realize just how normal it is to rest.
Yeah. So think about your existence, or the existence of any animal, as energy, right? So you're going to have higher energy times, you're going to have lower energy times. And for us as humans, it's usually pretty obvious. We go completely unconscious for 7-8 hours a night, which isn't a great survival tactic. So we've learned to build things to protect us from the environment and other dangers so that we can do that. Other animals don't have that luxury, so they're opportunistic, and so but they have to manage that energy. And animals like that, like lions and large predators, the type of food that they eat is really high calorie, but it is very it's very limited in its availability. So they will hunt, they'll gorge, and then they don't have to expend any more energy, right? I'm full, I'm good. I might not even eat for a few days because I now have all my energy needs met, as opposed to an animal that grazes. So something like we have our capybaras, which is the world's largest rodent, look like giant guinea pigs, super cute. But we've got a couple of them, Zeus and Iari, and they're constantly eating. And the reason is because they're eating really low calorie food because they're herbivores. And they have to constantly be eating in order to get enough calories, in order to have enough energy to go. But they also have a plethora of food to be able to eat. So they can take time to rest and everything. But, it really comes down to that energy piece, and you look at something like a hummingbird that is constantly going because it's just getting little sips of nectar from every flower. So the whole time it's awake, it is constantly eating, but it's also expending a ridiculous amount of energy because it's flying all the time. So every animal has a survival strategy that really comes down to energy conservation.
We must be the one species that does have the only opportunity to rest for 7-8 hours consistently.
Yeah.
I feel like.
And we've also developed animals that can do that. So our domesticated animals, dogs, cats, they will go unconscious. But again, we've bred them over the centuries to do that. People used to ask me all the time when I'm diving with sharks. Some sharks have to constantly swim in order to breathe, and that implies that they're swimming 24 hours a day. So how do you do that if you have to sleep? Like, it doesn't make sense, right? Well, the answer is they don't sleep. So they just like we do, they have two halves of their brain, and sometimes during the day and night, they turn one half of their brain off, and then the other half stays awake and kind of runs the ship, and then they swap back and forth. Certain bird species do that. A lot of species, especially if they're not apex predators, will have that kind of survival instinct. You might have even noticed, your dogs or cats, there's just this tiniest little sound and suddenly they're instantly awake, right? Whereas the human sitting next to them, they're still asleep, right? So they still have that in their DNA, that they always have to be on guard, ready to go. And again, that's a survival tactic.
Except if you've had like an experience, I guess, that's been so traumatic that now it's completely changed you to now where you're like one eye open when you're sleeping.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's the way you've been trained, and it's the experiences that you've had up to that point that really determine how you
It's interesting too, if we have those experiences, if that gets passed down through your DNA, or that experience would have to be repeated over and over again, generation after generation, in order to be starting to be passed down to us. It'd be interesting to kind of know that.
That's the nature versus nurture, sort of argument. And, I think a lot of that is you're predisposed to behaving a certain way because of your genetics. And if you are predisposed to being more alert, being more engaged, then you're probably going to pass down that trait to be that way, to your offspring. But, I know because I've got, two sons, 14-year-old and a 16-year-old. And, from my science mind kicks in, and they're a fascinating research study, because they've obviously grown up in the exact same household, right? And my wife and I are still together, and they've had my wife and I through their entire lives. They are so different, and their genetic, similarity is whatever, 99.99999%, right? Since they're brothers. But they've grown up in the exact same environment, but they are still completely different. And so it's really hard to put your finger on what's genetics, what is learned. But in my opinion, I think a lot of it, there's a lot of influence that the surrounding environment has on who we are and how we behave. And again, I think that's why the zoo is so impactful, because you can have somebody who might believe a certain way, might think a certain way, but then come and have this experience, right? That's not genetics. That's nature. It's nature versus nurture, right? They experience nature, and then they're completely transformed.
Well, it's interesting that like a lot of times we try to separate ourselves from like, this is us and then that's nature. And it's interesting because we tend to see that, especially when you live in like the concrete cities like Miami, that are, the wildlife is not a thing that you actually have to go out of your way to put wildlife in, with fake plants, fake trees all over the freaking place. And it's interesting, the concept of anthropocentrism, if I'm saying that correctly, where it takes the theory of like, I'll compare it to like how we used to think the Earth was the center of the universe and everything rotated around Earth, to where we realized it's the sun, and we're Earth, and we're just a very small part of it. And anthropocentrism, basically that theory states that like humans, we're just a part of nature, rather than referring to ourselves as everything revolves around us, which is what we think we are,
right?
Generally speaking, when we're just, we might have like the most pieces on the Monopoly board, right? But in totality,
we're still on the Monopoly board.
Yeah, exactly.
We're never getting off the Monopoly board. Yeah, we're still on this blue marble that's zinging around the sun. And humans have a really tough time with scale, right? It's when you think of planet Earth, the reason it's called planet Earth is because that's where we live. It's 75% water. It should be planet ocean. Right?
Yeah.
So we have a really hard time, again, getting out of that lens that we're looking through, and whether that's an individual lens or a species lens, that's extremely hard. You brought up living in this urban environment, and there are people that again, especially when you think about really big cities, New York, Chicago, where they may be completely isolated from nature, and maybe the only nature they know are the pigeons that are hanging out on the street. Or
New York City actually got a huge pigeon statue.
Yeah, exactly.
You see that?
Yeah, that's exactly it. There's been so many studies that have shown a correlation between exposure to nature and beneficial health outcomes, and just being able to move into that space. And it's not on a screen, right? It's you have to physically take your body to that space to really to really.
The sound's different. The air is different. Air is
it's the air is different. The experience is different. And again, if you think of it this way, as humans, we have created our own environment that we live in, right? But we've made that. It's artificial. And so, but that's not where we used to live. When we're wandering across the plains of Africa, we were completely intertwined with nature, and that's how we have evolved. Our brains function that way, our bodies function that way, and the further and further we get away from those connections to nature, I personally think the worse our health outcomes are going to be. So by being able to re-immerse yourself, even if it's for a couple hours, I think is really beneficial. There's a book called The Blue Mind, and it talks about how that connection to water, like literally walking by a stream and having that close physical connection to water has tangible health benefits. They show that when people go into nature, their heart rate slows down, right? They feel better after being in that space.
It's supposed to be our true home.
Yeah, exactly. Now, and again, to be explicitly clear, I'm not saying we should wipe out all of the development and everything that we've done. We just need to be aware that this is a part of who we are, and to not neglect that piece. And to sometimes you have to try a little bit harder to seek out those experiences. I've talked to a number of guests at the zoo. We have all these different experiences where you can get close to the animals and see a panther up close, or even go in and see our capybaras and those types of experiences. And we did a little experiment a couple of years ago where we just gave them away for free. And we would just, as people were walking through the zoo, we're like, hey, we have this experience at this time. You want to come do it? There were a number of people that I didn't even know that was a thing, right? And then they decided to do it. But there was a surprising amount of people there that's like, I don't think so. And we thought it was the price. There was a financial barrier that was keeping people from doing that. But we knew that these experiences were hugely impactful to people. We survey them, we talk to them. It's these magical experiences, right? But still, even without the price barrier, people weren't wanting to do it. So I, as the person in charge of all this, I dove into that, and I was like, so what's going on? Why are people doing this? And what it came back to was we weren't meeting people where they are in their connection to nature. They come to the zoo because it's safe, because the tigers are over there.
Yeah, it's controlled.
Not here, right? I love alligators. I love living in Florida. But the alligators in the zoo are over there. I'm not going to go hiking in the Everglades. So that is enough of an experience and an immersion in nature, and that's what I want. If we would have been like, well, no, you have to come do this, now it's tipping the scale into negative territory. And that's not what we want. We want people to have a good time when they come to the zoo. We want them to be in a positive mind frame, because it's that positivity that connects to all the dopamine receptors, in your brain, makes you feel better. And when you feel better, now that's going to elicit some sort of action when you leave and hopefully continue to save things in the wild.
Well, I've got some rapid fire questions about the zoo for you real quick too. I want to drag you in on.
Okay.
You were talking about hurricanes before. How is it when a hurricane hits? What are you guys doing? Because you can't obviously just leave like the Florida Panther or a tiger, out in the open with the hurricane. But then nobody really thinks that. Like, this stuff affects zoos. Zoos probably have to go through a whole thing. What is that like?
Yeah, so we have a very elaborate plan that keeps the animals and the humans safe. And essentially, it's similar to the plan that you would have at home. Step number one is we're monitoring the weather. We tend to monitor it a lot further out. Most people don't pay attention to a hurricane until they're in the cone of the cone of death, as we refer to it as. We're monitoring these things when they're not even systems yet. We have relationships with the National Hurricane Center as well as the Palm Beach EOC, Emergency Operations Center, and they give us information in real time way ahead of the storm as it's approaching, so that we can be prepared. We're not just closing shutters and going inside, right? We've got 400 or 500 animals that we have to prepare as well. And so that's kind of step number one. We're always monitoring. And then if the hurricane looks like it's going to be getting close, we make a determination on to what level we need to get prepared. If you've ever been to our zoo, you might have seen our barred owls. And that their habitat is not hurricane safe. So they would have to physically be moved. Now, the good news is that they're trained to go into essentially like a dog carrier. And then we can just walk them to our hospital, which is a Cat 5 rated building. All of our larger carnivores, their bedrooms that are adjacent to their habitats are hurricane safe structures.
They are. Okay.
So we just literally ask them to go inside and close the door, and they're safe. And so it depends on the intensity of the storm and what our actual impacts are going to be. If it turns out that we're going to take either a direct hit or even something close, then we'll get all of the animals prepared, get them under hurricane safe structures, and then we stand up our ride-out team. So this is the part that a lot of people don't know, is that there's a team of about 6 or 8 of us that actually ride out the hurricane with the animals during the entire time. Some I mentioned earlier that some of our animals are elderly, and they require daily medications. Our anteater, Cruz, has heart medication. Has to have his heart medication every single day. So somebody has to be there to give it to him. So I've ridden out.
You got the 55 plus community over there, don't you?
Yeah. We're the forever home for a lot of our animals, right? We're with them, their entire lives. But I've ridden out, 2 or 3 storms. Luckily, knock on wood, the time that I've been there, we haven't had any direct hits.
And you're not doing a Noah's Ark then.
Correct. We're not shipping the animals away or putting them all and getting ready for the big flood. Every single animal has a safe place to ride out the hurricane, and then we essentially become a small self-sufficient city. So we would be able to subsist for at least a couple weeks.
Oh wow, that's good.
Because we have enough food and everything for the animals, we have enough food for the humans that are there, and then be able to take care of the animals. And we figure after a couple of weeks, we'll probably be able to at least get supplies in, right? Even if it was a direct hit and it was bad. But like when Hurricane Dorian was menacing us off the coast a few years ago, that was terrifying, because that was a Cat 5 that was 100 miles away and was just scouring the Bahamas, and we were like, holy cow, this is going to be bad. And then it just went north, and we had a breezy day. Like there was virtually no impact. But we can't take a chance with that. We always have to prepare like it is going to be the worst. And the other part that we do that helps us prepare for that is we have a very robust training program for all of our animals. And so I mentioned the owls. Multiple times a week, we're asking them to go into that pet carrier, and we close the door and everything, and so that they're comfortable with that, so that come hurricane season, if we have to do that, then
It's not the first time.
Yeah, and even our big goal for all of our training programs is choice. And so we don't make the animals do anything. We give them the choice to do it. And I think the best example of that are some of our howler monkeys. So they would have to be moved in a similar way, but they can actually help us out, because when we ask them to go inside, we've trained them to be able to shut the door, reach back out, lock the door, and then there they are.
Okay.
And then if we actually had to move them, we would add one more step, which is like putting an industrial strength zip tie on the door. And then we can move them to our hospital and then cut the zip tie, and then they can unlock the door, let themselves out, and do it that way. And then when it's time to go back to habitat, we just reverse the process. So it keeps their stress nice and low. It keeps that good relationship that we have with them. And we know, again, with the low stress, good health outcomes, and it makes their immune system stronger.
Okay. Well, and one more question too with that. Have you ever had an animal escape a zoo?
So they, like a zoo or our zoo?
Your zoo.
Yeah. So we have had situations where animals have gotten out of where they were supposed to be. In my experience with that, it is frequently the animal maybe gets outside of their primary habitat. So they move into a staff area or something like that. And then it to me, it looks like they're overcome with agoraphobia. They're just like, oh my gosh, I'm not supposed to be here.
And then they go, because now they're okay.
Totally. They're just like, this isn't my home. Like they're just like weirded out by it, right? And so when that happens, usually we can just open the door to the habitat again and be like, you can go ahead and head back in. So, we train our staff all the time so that something like that doesn't happen. So now what we would be left with is, again, something unforeseen happens. An afternoon storm blows in, a tree falls over, something like that. And then, but it's those relationships that we have with the animals that we would send the staff in that have trained for this, and just ask the animal to, again, either get into a carrier or go back in the habitat. And it works.
Yeah. It's not like people usually envision with like zoo escapes and stuff like that, where they're running on the street and they're in downtown.
Yeah, and it's so many things have to go wrong.
Yeah, so many. Catastrophic.
In order for something like that to happen, that as long as you are diligent in doing these things at the very beginning, right? You don't have to worry about getting that far. But we train that far. We have a whole system where if that were to happen, then we can safely get that animal back where it needs to be.
Yeah. Well, appreciate that, Mike. Where can people kind of find you guys? I know West Palm Beach is that there. You guys open 24/7 or so. Where can people look up to buy tickets or find more info?
Yeah, so our website is palmbeachzoo.org, and you can purchase tickets there. You can find out more about our animal experiences if you're really wanting that up close interaction with animals. One of the things that we've just recently restarted is our birthday program. So if your kids want to come have their birthday at the zoo, it's a great place for them. They can come and bring all their friends and run around and have a great time. You can even add an animal experience onto that if they want to like see an otter or a panther up close. That's a really unique way to celebrate a birthday. But yeah, that's where you can find us 24/7, and then we're open 363 days a year. So we're closed Thanksgiving and Christmas, but those of us that are on the animal team, we're there even on those days.
Yeah. I'm sure. Well, I appreciate that, Michael. We'll either see you another episode or we'll see you there. All right. See you down the road.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Mike.